Today I have the luxury, the honor of being with one of my favorite newscasters, if not my favorite newscaster, Bill Maher. Somehow you had to settle for this, and I apologize.
I've never been called a newscaster, so
well,
already
you know what?
I'm ahead of the game.
You actually really
now
do.
I'm Walter Cronkite.
You actually do provide the news, as far as I'm concerned. To those
I am
of us.
Walter Cronkite. If I say we've lost Syria, we've lost it.
You are the Walter Cronkite and Rachel Maddow of my generation, and I really love that about you. So
well,
thank you. Thank you for doing this interview today.
Pleasure.
So I want to go straight into it. So we're doing real-time Double Dare, a live stand-up thing in D.C. where you're going to do your show. Then you're going to, Real Time with Bill Maher, then you're going to shoot over and do your 10th comedy special for HBO within 6 minutes. Why are you doing this to yourself?
No, it's exactly the question I've been asking all this month. Because, you know, when you agree to things, it's months away, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. No one's ever done that. I mean, it appealed to me on like kind of a dare level. Like, yeah, right. I could be the David Blaine of comedy. I could sit in an ice cube for 3 days. And then now as it approaches, I'm like, yeah, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But, you know, I'm into it now.
Is there a way to back out? Is it too late?
There's absolutely no way
because we can make some calls.
There are giant billboards up everywhere. And
just I mean, scratch out the second part of it.
It could go terribly wrong because, you know, Real Time takes so much out of me, being a once-a-week kind of show.
Right.
You know, that when the show's over, I am just always fried. And now I have to, instead of coming, we're taping right in the room where we usually have our little after party. You've been on the show.
Yes.
Instead of coming here and having a martini, I have to get a police escort and go to another theater and do a stand-up show, which takes an enormous amount of concentration. I'm usually, like every comedian, pacing before the show, getting my head together, and then there'll be no time for that. So we'll see. I mean, there'll be a danger element.
Right, which is very cool. Having done Broadway and having done 2 shows a day on the weekends, and getting a 3-hour break in between, I thought I had it bad, but you are really going for it.
I would hate that because my biggest fear would be forgetting lines.
Which I did often.
Everybody does.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you deal with that.
But I'm amazed that you're going to turn. So that's really turning on a different part of your brain, though, doing stand-up.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, but why not?
If anybody can do it, it's the newscaster, Bill Maher.
Well, no one's ever done it, so I have nothing to compare it to.
Did Cronkite ever do one of those where he did a stand-up act following?
Cronkite was very funny and very credible. He had very credible material. He would do a joke about the moon and be like, wow, I believe that.
That was one of his greatest bits ever.
When he says, take my wife, I think he really wants me to take his wife. Very credible.
All right, so since you've been on hiatus, the world has literally gone batshit apocalyptic.
I must say that is not a true premise. It's just the media makes it.
No, I think it's true. I think that you left TV and everything went insane.
Yeah, it's been insane.
I mean, it's just one thing after another. It's Ebola spreading everywhere. It's Israel and Palestine doing their weekly "We Hate You" checkups on each other.
Yeah, again,
nothing new.
Neither one of those things are new.
Right.
Ebola's been around. It is a little worse than it has been.
We've got Pervgate with Jennifer Lawrence and
I wouldn't call them
those
girls falling apart.
And of course ISIS.
And ISIS. Well, you know, ISIS. I read this quote on our show a couple weeks before we went off the air. The New York Times reported that there are literally thousands of Islamic militant groups like ISIS. Now, ISIS, they're bad, of course, and we shouldn't take them lightly, but they're not. That's not a new idea.
Right.
In fact, what they're great at is media.
Right.
You know, they were saying that, you know, before them, the first generation of this was Osama bin Laden, who would stand there very stiffly. Remember, we saw those videos, nothing in the background. These guys know how to do the media. It said before they took Mosul, the city of Mosul, people from all over the world were coming and joining any one of these many, many Islamic militant groups. After they took Mosul, everybody joined ISIS. It's like Facebook, you know. Just nothing succeeds like success. Nobody wanted to be with the MySpace Islamic terrorist
there is a
group.
level of, there is an added level of evil, it seems, to these guys that even Al Qaeda is like, well, we're not going to get involved with these clowns. They're taking it to a whole new level. Or is it the same old, and it's just...
Yeah, that's been made too much of because it's comedy friendly.
Right.
That even Al-Qaeda beheaded people too.
In terms of the PR of it all, which you brought up, I'm curious as to your thoughts as to what do you think about places like CNN airing the beheadings? What do you think about, some of these? Do you think there's an ethical question that comes up with?
I do. I don't think it's necessary. I think news should always think about, is this giving people information they need? I used to use the word disaster porn on this show. A lot of people objected to it, but I'd say once you report the disaster, and we've got all the information about it, once you just keep day after day going and sticking microphones in people's faces and just getting them to cry and talk about it, you're not advancing the story. You're not giving people new information. I don't know why we have to see it. I haven't looked at any of it.
I haven't looked at any either.
And I haven't looked at Jennifer Lawrence's naked pictures either. I'm
Right.
just that way.
Right. No, me too. That's actually
Not credible. That was not credible.
No, that actually is
like
true.
Walter Cronkite.
I have I actually do have personal friends on that list of girls who have
Really?
been exposed,
lucky
it's one of those things that's very difficult for me to fathom, this shaming that's going on now, where it's, Huffington Post wrote an article about the idea that if there's one person who shouldn't be held accountable for this happening, it's Jennifer Lawrence. She has the right to go out there and send pictures to her boyfriend or her lover, and that should be her private affair. But then to have those pictures exposed and to shame her, to call her a whore or what have you, there's something really sadistic about that.
To my point that the world isn't really falling apart, just the fact that we're talking about this.
Right.
Because this is about 1/1000th down on my list of things to care about.
Right.
I mean, it's not right, but that's the world we live in, and so many worse things happen to people than having your nudies out there. I mean, we have to buddy up to the fact that we live in this age where anything you write or any picture you take is always there forever.
Right.
The NSA has already seen those pictures. They've already laughed at it and passed it around the office. And yes, it's not right, but then don't take those pictures. Get a Polaroid, give it to your boyfriend.
I think I'm nervous because I personally have pictures on iCloud of me doing suspect things to a guinea pig that I really don't want out there. So I'm afraid that I'm the next victim, and I'm hoping to avoid that. Speaking of insane events, I just read that our friend Putin has now agreed to a ceasefire, so to speak. What do you think?
Well, what ceasefire means.
Is he buying time before he shoots down another
ceasefire is
aircraft?
Code for stopping to reload. That's what it means with Israel and Hamas. That's,
right.
I don't think anyone is naive about Vladimir Putin. My question is always, why is it our problem? Why is everything our problem? Why is ISIS primarily our problem? I admit we should take steps to keep them from coming to our shores.
Right.
And they could, but we've been living with this since 9/11 and before 9/11, the problem of Islamic terrorists coming to our shores and wanting to attack us. ISIS actually talks less about attacking the West than Al-Qaeda did. They think they're going to have a caliphate. They think they're going to take over the whole world first, and the Middle East. Jordan has an air force. Saudi Arabia has an air force. Egypt has an air force. I know because we sold it to them. There are planes, probably, mostly. Why can't they bomb ISIS? Why can't Europe take care of Putin? That's in their backyard. Germany has a lot of experience fighting Russians. We shouldn't have to do everything. We're like the helicopter parents, always hovering over every place that has a problem. Other people should stop relying on America to do everything for them. You take care of your local problems. If it gets really out of hand, maybe you can call us. But we shouldn't be the first resort for every problem in the world.
But the problem is that people like countries like Germany have relations that go a lot deeper than just diplomacy with some of these countries.
Then you have to choose what's important.
Exactly. It's funny that you were talking about the idea that U.S. going into ISIS and ISIS not being a direct problem. I feel like it wasn't considered a direct problem for the Obama administration until our journalists are beheaded on national television. He wasn't doing it. He wasn't, he said we don't have a plan. We didn't have a plan up until yesterday. and then he announced we are going to destroy these guys. Right?
First of all, they made way too much of that. He said we don't. Basically, he said we're developing a strategy.
A strategy.
He was talking about the Pentagon specifically, and that's what goes on in the Pentagon. They develop war strategies, and sometimes it takes a little while. This is a fluid situation on the ground. ISIS is changing all the time. They had that Mosul dam a week ago. Now they don't. We're developing the exact plan, but he has a strategy, which is drop bombs on people, which is our strategy for everything, which we have been doing with ISIS. And by the way, it is working. ISIS has been pushed back. The Kurds are now in ascendancy in the areas that they were nervous about, and it's going to help the Iraqi army too. It's funny because now we're on the side of Iran and Syria, the people who only a year ago we were musing out loud that we might be bombing them.
Yes. Yeah.
So, maybe we just shouldn't get that involved. When you have to choose, Syria, there's people, John McCain liked to get some troops on the ground in there yesterday. When you have to choose between the guy who's got the poison gas and the people who behead folks and put it up on YouTube, maybe let them fight it out with each other.
Absolutely. And this isn't a new thing either. This goes back to the same Shiite-Sunni issue that's been going on since 700 BC. This is something that is not going to go away anytime soon.
Right.
If these guys can't get along fighting over the same God, then we're not going to be able to move the needle. And this is a fundamental problem. You leave Iraq, it falls into the hands of other despots. There is no easy way out of this situation.
No, and you bring up an interesting point about the Sunnis and the Shiites. I've talked about the fact that when I criticize the Muslim world and say this is a religion that is different than every other religion, liberals who I don't think follow this that closely, maybe they are now with ISIS, they get mad at me because they think I'm being bigoted toward a minority, which is ridiculous. But I've made the point that if this was the 16th century or the 14th century, I'd be talking about how Christianity is the religion that is way too violent, because that was the age, the 14th century, of the Inquisition and all the lovely things.
They hated my people.
Burning
hated my people for
Jews,
a while.
yes.
Yes.
Burning witches at the stake.
Yes.
And the 16th century was the age when Protestants and Catholics, which were the Shiites and the Sunnis of that era in that religion, were slaughtering each other the entire century all across the continent. But the Western world came out of that period, and we don't do that now. The Islamic world has not come out of that period, and that's why I'm a little more concerned with them than I am, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
And I hope that people are starting to get that idea in their head, that all religions are not alike.
What do you think the reason for that is? Do you think it's education? Do you think that there's just a lack of education in that region and people are being suppressed to the point where they can't learn that there are other routes in life rather than...
You're talking about the Islamic world?
Well, I'm talking about these factions, these factions of the Middle East that seem to constantly fall into these patterns.
The Islamic world needs the Reformation and the Renaissance that the Christian world had, again, at the end of our Middle Ages. They seem to be in their Middle Ages. Yeah. Obviously, they have people who would like to return to the Middle Ages. I noticed they have 7th century ideals about beheadings and women and lots of free speech, and yet they're perfectly okay to use 21st century technology. I think you have to pick. I think you should not be able to call somebody up on a cell phone and say, come on over to the stoning.
Yeah.
If you're going to be doing stonings, no cell phones.
Just
got
little drawings on rocks. And
that's right.
Send it to
one or the other.
On more domestic topics, if you have a couple of minutes, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I like to call the politicization of the federal judges. There's this consistent sort. In Louisiana yesterday, they shot down this gay marriage equality ruling, where a judge basically said that for longer than not, gays were not allowed to marry each other. Mm-hmm. And so based on that logic and that reasoning, we shouldn't jump into it so readily right now. I feel like we're seeing, I don't want to say bigotry, but we're seeing a little bit of a lack of logic in some of these decisions. And
of course, because it's religious based.
Right.
And I will answer the question about federal judges in a minute, but just to put it into perspective about the gay thing, there are 80 countries in the world that have anti-gay laws. Russia, we found out, was one of them during the Olympics. 10 countries, it's the death penalty. Now, I could name those countries. There are places like Sudan and Somalia and Saudi Arabia and Yemen. They're all Muslim countries, have the death penalty. But by all means, don't go to the Beverly Hills Hotel and eat the soup. That's what's going to bring that problem to its knees. Now, federal judges, I mean, you know, what's interesting is you mentioned politicization. One of the big scandals during the Bush administration, remember, was U.S. attorneys. Remember that? The U.S. attorneys, which are like, there's about 2 per state. I think there's 90 of them. These are the top cops in these state districts. They were trying to politicize them. They were trying to get these people to investigate Democrats, and when they pushed back, some of them got fired by Alberto Gonzales, who was Bush's attorney general at the time. That's what that was all about. You know, they talk about the Obama scandals. He really doesn't have any scandals. I mean, it's been a very clean administration. They make things up and they try to say things that, oh, the IRS and the Benghazi, these aren't scandals. That was a scandal. Trying to mess politically with the U.S. attorneys, they are supposed to be above the law. But as we know, even the Supreme Court is not above politicization.
No, they're not.
The Supreme Court is very political.
Not only that,
but it never used to be.
But I feel like since 2000, every major decision comes down to 5-4, which is disconcerting.
A lot of them, yeah.
Isn't that why we have the 3 branches? Isn't it so that this doesn't happen, to avoid this sort of thing?
Well, you just hope that the judges on the Supreme Court are ruling by their idea of what is in the Constitution, and not the politics comes first. And then I will find something, because, I mean, you've been to law libraries. They've got a lot of books in there.
Right.
It looks like you could probably find a law to back up any position you took. And I feel like that's what people like Scalia are doing.
Well,
you know, this is a very serious religious guy. We did something on the show once about his comments on the devil. He thinks the devil is active among us. You know, he's around. But, okay, you know, I don't want a guy who thinks the devil is real making decisions about our lives here in America in the 21st century. If you think the devil is real, you'd be more comfortable with ISIS.
Right.
Everything comes back to ISIS.
It all comes back to ISIS.
Because it's a very cool name. You got to
the J-Lo photos come back to ISIS. It all goes back to ISIS. No, but there is something about this idea that Hobby Lobby is a perfect example, where you can pick and choose, you know, something, you can pull something out of your butt to support your to support the logic, but it doesn't make it logical. If you read the decision, it's completely illogical.
Well, you have to understand, in America, if you say the word faith, which is what Hobby Lobby basically said, this is our faith, everything stops. Everybody just throws logic out the window and puts that at the head of the class. And nobody ever really says what I keep trying to say, which is faith. It just means that's my opinion. That's your opinion. Your faith is an opinion. I think it's a particularly stupid opinion. I've never understand why faith is good. People say the word faith and everybody just backs off. Just tell me why the purposeful suspension of critical thinking, which is faith, why that's a good thing. Why is this a good thing when you go, you know what? I'm not even going to apply logic to this situation. How about that?
Right. And there is something, ironically, to the fact that we're becoming more and more puritanical, even though it feels like we've been through that period, and then we sort of advanced out of that period, and now we're reverting back a little bit, whether it's creationism in schools, or whether it's this idea of, you know, decisions being made out of a faith-based logic. There is something a little strange to me about this reverting. The idea that we're going back to...
It's against the trend in the Western world. Most European countries are mostly over faith. You know, the Scandinavian countries are, you know, 80 to 90% atheistic. Even Italy, I think, is, is I think 50% atheist. I think England, same thing. You know, they're over that. They're over religion and they're over marriage. They're not over commitment. you know, they have babies and families. They just don't feel the need to, you know, involve the government in their love life, which I've never kind of understood either.
So how did we get to this place? How did we get to this point?
Well, we're still a young country. You know, we're you know, they're a much older civilization, and they've been through, I guess, a lot more than we have. They've seen more. I think they're wiser. For that reason, they're sometimes also more jaded. Mm-hmm. They have problems we don't have. I mean, I know lots of Europeans who have come here because they say, yeah, the economy there, it's too stultifying, you know. Well, there is a spirit in America that's still there and still alive and entrepreneurial. Look at the way we came out of the worldwide recession that we started. But other countries did not come out of it so well. And this is despite...
You mean Greece? Greece didn't do too well.
But even England and France and we, you know, this is despite the fact that the Republicans gave Obama absolutely no help.
It's unbelievable.
But you just cannot put down the American urge to get out there and work and make money and compete, and you know, that's the good part of us. It also has a terrible side. It's also why we have such a terrible income inequality problem and so many people who are just desperate in this country, because that's our attitude here is, you know what, winners and losers.
I come from a middle class family, and you can't find what was defined as middle class in the 1980s these days. People, especially on both coasts, are struggling to just make ends meet, and it's very sad. The other thing that I find very sad is I just got back from Toronto, and flying over California for the first time in 3 months, I literally felt like I was flying over the Dust Bowl. It was so insane to me how dry and how depleted the rivers and the lakes are. And you know, it's this other thing, you know this based on our previous discussions, but it drives me nuts, is this denial of climate change, is this denial that anything we're doing as human beings is contributing to what would otherwise be happening cyclically. You know, how do you combat that? How do you get to a place where our government actually has the balls to steer this thing in a different direction, or is it too late? And should we just be like, well, you know what, we'll lose Florida, we may lose Manhattan to...
I mean, it may very well be too late. I remember James Hansen, the NASA scientist, who's one of the leading voices on this, saying, if we don't do something in 10 years, we will have passed the tipping point. And that was in 2003. So we certainly haven't done anything. It only gets worse. Again, to the point of America being out of step with other Western countries, other countries have conservative parties. Oh, this is the only one that just flat out says global warming is a hoax.
A hoax.
You know, other countries have conservative parties, but they work with the liberals on how to deal with this problem. They don't deny that the problem exists. They have a different approach. Maybe it's a market-based approach. Now, in our politics, the market-based approach, which used to be the Republican approach, is now the Democratic approach. There's another problem with our politics. What used to be right-wing is now center, and the Democrats adopt it. That's all the Democrats are asking to do about global warming, the same thing George Bush I did about acid rain. Cap and trade, a market-based approach. No, but they've moved so far to the right, they don't want their own plan of 20 years ago. What they want to say is just stick your head in the sand, and by the way, it's all going to be sand, and just pretend it doesn't exist.
And you know what? The polling indicates that Americans are just fine with that, because they seem to
No, Americans seem to be...
the lowest approval ratings is it in history?
I call it the Thelma-Louise approach to global warming. We're just holding hands and driving off the Grand Canyon.
Right.
And that's it. We're going to go out strong. And if that's you know, I always say, young people have to care about this issue more than I do. I'm 58 years old. I've had my fun with this planet. I hope to have more fun with it. But if you don't care more about it when you're 25, because I don't even know what this world's going to be like in 30 years. I mean, they say there'll be no fish. You know, we're going to be eating jellyfish and cockroaches and Soylent Green.
That's right.
It's just going to be ugly. Species wiped out. You know, the bees are dying. They pollinate the crops. As you say, you fly over California. It's just...
I've never seen anything like it. It was very disturbing, and
it is disturbing.
And it's no longer. You know, it's funny because when Al Gore released An Inconvenient Truth,
right,
it was shocking to all of us because we didn't really have or at least I certainly didn't have a notion of what was coming and couldn't see how it was playing out in day-to-day life. And with the drastic changes all over the world, you're seeing it firsthand. There are giant icebergs melting. There are giant pieces of Greenland falling off into the ocean. We're paying the price now.
I was in Alaska last year, and I flew over I saw one what they call calving, where it falls right into the ocean. It makes you cry. And Al Gore, he did have it right. He said we could, with the rising of the oceans, we could lose Amsterdam, we could lose New York, we could lose Florida. And if anybody knows about losing Florida, it's Al Gore. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. How many more cards you have there, Judge?
I'm done with the cards. I've got 3 little quick questions for you that I've always wanted to ask you. One is, who's going to win the next presidential election?
Well, if I was betting my own money, I would put it on Hillary. I mean, I think she's definitely going to run. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think she'd be hard to beat. I don't think the Republicans have a strong field. I think the most interesting candidate they could put up would be Rand Paul, because he's
Really?
Absolutely. First of all, he would make me consider him. I mean, he's on some issues, unless he waffles, he's terrific. The drug war, has always been against that. Getting rid of the empire, come home America. Very attractive to millennials.
Right.
Been good on the NSA, been really good on race relations, working with Cory Booker on stuff. He's interesting. He could draw millennial votes away from Hillary Clinton.
That is interesting. I always thought Marco Rubio would be their best.
Rubio? No, I don't think he's ready for prime time.
I think he's ready for prime time, but I certainly think that vote and that could be huge for him.
The Latino vote?
The Latino vote, I think, could be, especially, I'm from Florida. I think that it would be very beneficial.
So we're assuming Latinos are going to vote for him just because?
Not assuming, but I think that...
Because when he stuck his head out of the ground for a half a second to come out for immigration reform, they shot it off and he crawled right back to the Republican Party line. And I'm not so sure that Latinos are going to vote for him.
That's true. My other question for you is how big of a sweep are the Republicans going to have in the midterms?
Well, I mean, polling is pretty accurate these days. I mean, they're pretty good at predicting. At least the Nate Silver polling, not the Republican polling. As we remember from 2012, they totally were living in their own bubble and thought Mitt Romney was going to win by a landslide. But no, I mean, we know that in the midterms, the liberal base doesn't show up. And, they talk about how bad politicians are, and they are, but boy, the voters are no prize either. They kind of get what they deserve. They don't. There was a really sad article I read a couple of months ago that said the people who most benefited from everything Obama has done, like health care, are the least likely to vote. So you know what? If you can't even get up and say thank you one day every 2 years, it's kind of on you.
Right. And then that brings me to my final question, which is, what is Obama's legacy 10 years from now?
I think it's pretty damn good, I mean,
they've done a good job beating him up, though.
Of course. I mean, we always knew it was going to happen. I just didn't think it was going to be this vicious. I mean, I've never seen the kind of in-your-face disrespect that they gave to this president, and that's racial. I know they hate when you say that, but it's true. But I mean, I think historians will be kind to him. First of all, Obamacare. I mean, how many presidents tried to get this through?
For 6 years now.
They finally did it.
If it lasts.
Finally, it'll last. I mean, the Supreme Court made that ruling, and yes, there'll be bumps along the way, as there were with Social Security and Medicare and all these programs. It takes a while to tweak them, but we finally joined all the other big boy countries in the world and made healthcare kind of a right. But also just the economy.
He staved off a depression. We never give credit to that, do we?
No, because they always say, well, nobody votes on it, could have been worse. Why? Is that a concept that's just beyond the American ability to understand? I cannot understand the concept of it could have been worse. That is beyond me. Yeah, I mean, we were losing 750,000 jobs a month when he took office. And I think his greatest quality has been his calm. I mean, I rest easier knowing that when everybody's screaming at him, you know, do this and do that, and you know, go put troops on the ground in Iraq again, and he's like, you know what? I don't work on your cycle. I don't work on a 24-hour news cycle. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to think about it. I'm not going to panic. And I remember the panic the country was in the fall of 2008 when Lehman Brothers went down and people were basically taking their money out of the bank and putting it in the mattress. You know, that calm was so important. Saving the auto industry, you know, when Mitt Romney and others wanted to. I mean, just the psychological damage of watching GM go down, that flagship company, when somebody once said, remember, as GM goes, so goes the country. Huge. And overseas, you know, I think he stayed too long in Afghanistan. I have lots of quibbles. Didn't do anything about the drug war, but I also understand that he had so much on his plate, and you can't do everything. Certainly not.
You also can't do everything with a group of people who won't let you do anything.
That's true. But also he had to wait on certain things. You know, the environment, he's been both disappointing and at the same time the best president we've ever had on the environment. So it's, you know, every president's record is a bit of a mixed bag, but I think it'll be pretty good. And he does have a way of, like, a year or two after I'm screaming at him to do something, he does it. Not because I was screaming at him, just because he gets around to it. Gay marriage, or whatever it is. And my hope is that he will leave with a speech about the environment, just the way Eisenhower did about the military-industrial complex. I would love to see him go out with that speech that says, you know what, we're not going to have to worry about all the other problems if we don't deal with this problem.
Right. Thank you so much.
Hey,
best newscaster in the business.
You're a good interviewer.
Hey, you taught me well.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. Well, wink, wink. Yeah, all the lessons we were having at my house.